What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Wednesday, so time to go over some more wide receivers you guys have been asking about. Before we do that though, have to start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was going into the Monday night game. How many rookie running backs rank inside the top 15 in half PPR scoring this season? The answer is 4. And Jace was the first to guess the number correct, and Luke was the first to guess the names right. It's James Robinson, Antonio Gibson, Jonathan Taylor, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think Helaire is 16th now because Nick Chubb passed him, but of course it was going into the Monday night game. Today's stat: what player leads the league in air yards per target? So who is the biggest deep threat, I guess, in the game right now? All right, so the list of players you guys asked me to go over is Justin Jefferson after his dud game. A ton of people asked about Keke Coutee, basically saying, hey, he plays the Colts again this week, and he's been good whenever they've played him. Is he a guy we should be starting? So we'll go over that. Go over Lynn Bowden also because of, just injuries, just decimating the Dolphins. Is Lynn Bowden someone that we can look at this week? Diontae Johnson after getting benched for his million drops recently. And then finally Chris Godwin because he hasn't really played up to the level we were hoping. Is that something we can continue to see going forward? Can we trust him as more than just a flex or a wide receiver 3? So we'll start things off with Justin Jefferson. He's coming off a 4-reception, 39-yard performance. It was easily his worst game since week 8. He'd been having a really, really nice, consistent stretch with a lot of upside each week. The thing is, I am personally not worried about this performance. So I was actually very high on this passing attack last week. I used them for DFS, basically because the Bucs are really, really good defense, but you cannot run on the Bucs. You just can't do it. Anyone who tries to run the Bucs, they're not going to be successful. Of course, Dalvin Cook had the 100 yards, but it took him a lot of carries to get there. And in general, if you're not basically Dalvin Cook, if you're just a normal running back, you're not going to succeed against the Bucs. And so when teams face them, they throw the ball on a very high percentage of their plays. And so I was looking at that and saying, okay, well, we have a very consolidated target share. I mean, it was basically Cook, Smith, Thielen, and Jefferson were kind of the only guys who were going to get at least a significant workload in the targets. And so if they were going to throw the ball, over 40 times potentially, that opened up a massive amount of potential targets for Jefferson and Thielen. And it sort of worked out that way. The problem was the Vikings offensive line just could not hold up. So we would have gotten potentially smash games from both Thielen and Jefferson, but Cousins had no time to throw. It's not really on Cousins. I mean, he dropped back. Obviously, the Bucs still have a good pass defense, so guys aren't just wide open. And within a second or two, he's already being hit. He's already being forced out of the pocket. I mean, he had absolutely no time. So that is part of the reason why Jefferson didn't have that great of a game. But going into that week, he'd finished the top 15 wide receiver in 4 straight games. He was averaging 10 targets per game over that stretch, 4 touchdowns in those 4 games. And that includes a matchup in Chicago where he posted 8 for 135. So the question I guess you guys are asking is, after this dud, can we trust him against the Bears this week? Yes. My initial rankings have him at 11. That might not exactly hold, but I do think he's a low-end 1, a high-end 2. He is an extremely talented rookie wide receiver. He's going to be a phenomenal receiver in this league, and he has already broken out. And so I'm assuming that Cousins will have more time to throw this week. The Bears defense is not as good as the Bucs. He's already destroyed this Bears defense recently, and so I have no issues starting him. It was just a brutal matchup, so I think we need to cut him a little bit of slack. And again, it's not Cousins and his fault. It's the offensive line. If they can hold up, these two are going to have a really nice connection. They just couldn't hold up last week. But I think at home against the Bears this week, pretty good matchup. I think he's going to do well. A lot of people, I'm actually shocked about how many people asked about Keke Coutee. I'm imagining it's because a ton of you added him. He has the monster game against the Colts. He has the touchdown catch last week. You're like, can this stuff kind of continue? Coutee has 3 career games against the Colts. And I know I've tweeted this out, I think twice now. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. but he's gone over 100 yards 3 times in his career, and it's been against the Colts, and the Colts. Like in 3 of his 4 career games against them, he's had just a monster performance. And, those are the only 3 games where he's played over 75% of the snaps. He's got a few games in the 70s, a few duds in there. So it's not like, every game he's ever played, a significant portion of the snaps he's gone off. Like he has still had some duds. But it's worth noting, when they're giving him the volume, he's producing. And you look at this offense, and it's like Hopkins is gone, obviously. We've got Fuller out. We've got Cooks out. We've got Stills out. Like, it's just, you keep going through all these players, and it's just everyone's gone. Cobb out. So when you look at who Watson can even throw to, there aren't very many names. Chad Hansen is like a fine player. The tight ends, honestly, Akins isn't all that good. Fells isn't all that good. Like Watson doesn't want to really throw to them. He's not targeting the running backs at a crazy high rate. And so it's not surprising that we have an elite quarterback with at least competent receiving cores. He's going to produce throwing them the ball. And realistically, we don't even know how good Coutee is. And that's basically to say he could be better than we think. Bill O'Brien just hated him. He just did not like Coutee. He would not play him under any circumstances. I mean, like, obviously, when Bill O'Brien was there for a large portion of that time in 2018, 2019, so that'd be Coutee's rookie season, sophomore season, he's playing behind Hopkins, right? Every coach is going to play Hopkins over Coutee. But why was he benched? Because, like, behind him, Fuller was only active for like half of the games during that stretch, and they never really had any talent behind those two. So, there has to be a reason. I don't know what it is, but given that Bill O'Brien was a coach, like, the reason doesn't have to be logical. Sometimes he just does things that make no sense. So it is very possible that Coutee is a good wide receiver, and he just hasn't had the opportunity. And now that he has the opportunity, he's going to produce. Again, I'm not saying that Coutee is an elite receiver. He's not. But I'm saying that Deshaun Watson is an elite quarterback. And there's a chance for Coutee to see elite volume. And so he doesn't need to be an elite wide receiver. He just needs to be a decent wide receiver. And I think there is a chance that he is one. So I do think that I would feel good about using him in the flex. I don't think there's a projection system out there that's going to project Coutee above maybe the wide receiver 25. So if you look at projections, I bet you he's going to fall in that like 27 to 35 kind of range. So it's going to be on the fringe of basically all of your decisions. I would just say that if you really don't like your other options, do not feel bad about using Coutee in the flex, using him as your wide receiver 3 in some leagues, your second flex. I would not feel bad about that at all, because just look at who else they're going to throw to. And this is not a game where we expect the Texans to jump out to a lead and hold a lead. The Colts are the better team. They're probably going to hold a lead for most of this game. And so we're going to have a situation like we just saw when Coutee erupted against them a few weeks ago, when the Texans need to catch up. I mean, Watson's going to get close to 300 yards, and Coutee's one of the only people that he can throw to. So I do think he is a viable play moving forward. And so don't feel bad if you have to use him, even in the fantasy semifinals. Not something we thought we'd be saying earlier in the season, but such is 2020. Another interesting question, and one that we also didn't think we'd be talking about at this point of the season, is Lynn Bowden viable? So if you've been with us since the summer, you've heard us mention him a few times. It would only really be in dynasty content because no one was drafting Lynn Bowden in redraft leagues. But I do believe I went over him in 1 to 2 dynasty videos. And so we see the Raiders actually draft Lynn Bowden as a running back, but it was pretty clear every team viewed him as a wide receiver. He was just drafted as a running back. But so he gets traded to the Dolphins, where he's on right now, if you don't know. And so he sees like a few snaps here and there throughout the beginning, middle of the season, but he doesn't see any real action until week 12, where he played 31% of the snaps. Week 13, he plays 44%. And then this last week, week 14, he plays 71% of the snaps. So you look at that and you're like, ooh, okay, they're ramping up his workload a lot. He did convert 9 targets last week into 7 receptions for 82 yards. and he played the most snaps of any Dolphins pass catcher. He also had 1 carry for 2 yards. Again, he can get carries at running back, but don't expect him to get all that many. It's going to be a very small amount of his fantasy production in there. The reason, though, that he played the most snaps of any Dolphins pass catcher was because Diontae Parker got hurt, Jakeem Grant got hurt, Mike Gesicki got hurt. And so when your entire receiving core gets injured, yeah, you got to throw someone in there. And so if they had stayed healthy, Bowden's not seeing 71% of the snaps, but could he have seen like 50%? Like, they were clearly working him more into the offense. It's possible he saw more. Now, I don't have any real update on Parker or Gesicki, but Grant is week to week with his injury. I don't think Grant's going to play. That's probably the biggest one for him because he can pretty easily take over Grant's role. So regardless, like if Parker's back, if Gesicki's back, I still think Lynn Bowden's going to have a role as long as Grant is out, and it seems like Grant is going to be out. But if all these guys miss, if we see Parker, Grant, Gesicki all out, the only other receivers, so not running backs, to have a target last week were Bowden, and then Mac Hollins, Adam Shaheen, Durham Smythe, Malcolm Perry, and Antonio Callaway. So that's not very good, right? Like, that is not a good receiving core. It is not shocking that Lynn Bowden was, the top option amongst those players. And so, again, if all those guys are out, Parker, Gesicki, and Grant, we can realistically look at Bowden probably in a full PPR league because touchdown upside, low. Total yardage upside, probably also low, but could he rack up 6, 7, 8 receptions just like he did last week? Absolutely. They're going to be low ADOT receptions, but in PPR, I don't care. If you're getting 6, 7, 8 receptions, you're in the conversation for like a wide receiver 2 or a flex. Would not. Just want to say that. Not feel good about him. 10 or 12 team leagues, wide receiver 2. That'd be, I don't know, just like a little bit surprising if you made it to the semifinals, but now you have to use Lynn Bowden as your wide receiver 2. Like, how did you get to the semifinals? And then also, it's a matchup with the Patriots. It's home, so at least that's good, but it's a matchup with New England. And we've got, like we talked about with Herbert, rookie quarterbacks going up against a Bill Belichick defense is not always good for the rookie quarterback, especially when their top 3 pass catchers are all hurt. So it is a very low floor spot. It is probably a low upside spot, but 14-team league, second flex spot, or even in your flex spot in a full PPR league, I think you can go there if all those guys are out because they're going to have to throw to someone. Diontae Johnson is next up, and boy, has he been frustrating. I mean, he just drops every pass now, and it's crazy. I mean, he has 7 drops over the last 3 weeks. There are plenty of seasons where 7 drops will be amongst the leaders across the whole season. Never mind through 3 weeks. I mean, that's over twice as many as any other receiver. It's 2 more than actually Ebron for second place in the most drops. And these aren't like sometimes a player gets a drop and it was still a pretty difficult pass, right? Like, it's a drop, but they were ranging to their side. It was like an over the shoulder catch. They're trying to use one hand and they dropped it. That is not the case for Diontae Johnson. Some of these balls should have been caught by pretty much any like adult human being. He should have had most of these catches. They are really, really bad drops. And it's not shocking that Tomlin benched him last week. Now, he didn't bench him for the whole game, but after he had, I believe it was 2 really, really bad drops early last week, he only ended up playing 49% of the snaps. So, unfortunately, we go from Diontae being a very, very high floor play because he was seeing at least 10 targets in every healthy game. He was converting a lot of those. So the floor was insanely high. And of course, the touchdown upside was there. Of course, the just fantasy upside in general was there because when you're getting, 13, 15 targets, yeah, you're probably going to have a really good game. So you look at the matchup and you're like, ooh, Diontae, the floor. I mean, if he drops his first target this next week, there is a chance that Tomlin is sitting there like, you know what? I've got Claypool, Juju, and James Robinson, and this kid can't catch a pass in a game that they are going to win. Like, the Steelers are going to beat the Bengals very easily. they don't really need Diontae Johnson. And so if he drops his first pass or like one of his first 3 targets, there is a chance that he gets benched. Again, it's not going to be for the whole game. But if he's only playing 50% of the snaps, that really limits his floor and his ceiling. So since that future exists, there is a path to him being benched in this next game. I have to drop him more than I would in the rankings. Right now, in the initial run, again, you kind of want to look at the rankings more like Wednesday afternoon, but really on Thursday, that's when the rankings will start getting a lot better. He might move around from that 19 spot, but I think like a mid to low end wide receiver too, because he has top 5 upside. This is a very easy matchup. He's a very talented receiver. He has the upside to get 15 targets because of the role he plays in the offense. And so he could finish as like the number 1 wide receiver this week. And so you're not just completely benching him because he has that sort of upside if he doesn't commit drops. But I have to lower him because he's at risk of being benched in a game that they're pretty easily going to win. They might just have to bench him if he has another drop. And honestly, it really comes down to what I talked about in yesterday's video. Let's say you're going up against Tyreek Hill and Derrick Henry. You know what? You probably need to play Diontae Johnson because there are not very many players capable of getting 15 targets. I mean, he's already posted 6 for 116, a touchdown against this Bengals team. And so if you're, that much of an underdog, because I mean, if you're playing Tyreek Hill and Derrick Henry, you're probably an underdog. If you're a big underdog against teams that are capable of just scoring 175 points, you're probably going to play Diontae. But if you're a pretty big favorite and you look at their team and they have like solid players, but no one with that high of a ceiling, and you've got like a 15, 20 point advantage, maybe you do bench him if you've got really solid options. Like if you've got someone who's pretty comparable that's not at risk of being benched in their game, maybe you bench Diontae to eliminate some of that risk. So it really comes down to who you have. Final wide receiver we'll go over today is Chris Godwin, which, obviously he's an exceptional talent, but he just hasn't been all that great in fantasy recently since Brady spreads the ball around so much and he leans on Mike Evans when they get into the red zone. On the season now, Chris Godwin ranks as the wide receiver 26 in fantasy points per game, and he is coming off his worst game of the season, only 2 receptions, 25 yards on 3 targets. One thing that I want to note on last week is that, yes, the 3 targets are brutally low, but Tom Brady has 6 games of 40 or more pass attempts on the season, 11 games with 35 or more pass attempts. He only had 23 attempts last week. So in 11 of 13 games, he's thrown the ball at least 35 times. He only did so 23 times on Sunday. So yes, it was a bad game for the Bucs wide receivers, but we shouldn't expect Brady to throw the ball 23 times on average. His average is going to be much closer to like 35 to 38 pass attempts. And so when you add 15 attempts, Godwin's going to have more targets. If we look at Godwin's second worst game of the season, comes in week 9 against the Saints. Brady threw 209 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Godwin's third worst game of the season, week 6, when the Bucs just destroyed the Packers and Brady didn't need to throw the ball at all. So in every other game, so in games where Brady doesn't throw the ball like 23 and 27 times when he's actually at his normal attempts, and when they don't get just smothered by the Saints defense, in every other game, Godwin has posted a pretty solid stat line. Like, go back and look. He doesn't really have any duds besides those 3 games. And so, since those 3 games are more the outliers, every other game is more of the average performance you'd expect, I really don't have very many concerns in playing him. If we're going to assume this game is remotely close, so they're not dominating or getting dominated, and the matchup isn't overly difficult, then Godwin should have quality fantasy performances. And this week, that is to be expected. I mean, I do think the Bucs are going to beat the Falcons, but I don't think they're just going to absolutely dominate the Falcons. I think the Falcons will put up a fight. The Falcons are a pass funnel, so you should expect Tom Brady to be closer to his 40 pass attempt games. And so I do think you're starting Godwin as a wide receiver too, if you have him, unless your wide receiver core is just phenomenal. So I hope that was helpful for a lot of you. We still have the running back and the wide receiver start sit videos on Thursday and on Friday. So if you have more questions on players, it might be answered in those videos. And remember that the rankings are free for the rest of the fantasy season. So that is the end of this one. Hope you guys enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.